So, good morning, children. So, after understanding chapter 2, which is the President and Vice President of India, who are the important executives in the administration of the country, then let us try to understand the other significant and the other utmost important executives of the nation, which are Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. So, in this chapter, we will try to understand the institution of Prime Minister and Council of Ministers, how they function, and how they contribute to the administration of the country. So, let us go into the chapter. So, in the previous chapter, we have already seen the fundamental difference between the presidential democracy and parliamentary democracy. So, where the presidential democracy, the citizens elect even the executive head called president, as well as the legislature there. So, whereas in India, we adapt parliamentary kind of democracy. Here, the parliament plays a significant role than the president. So here the citizens will elect the legislature and the legislature will select their executive head. Here the executive head I am talking about is the prime minister and his council of ministers. You all know that president is head of executive, but he is a nominal. But here how citizens will choose their executive head? The citizens will elect their member of representatives, and these representatives again will elect their real executive head. And the real executive head, you all know that it is the prime minister and his council of ministers. The nominal executive head is president for India, and the real executive head of the nation is prime minister. How prime minister is selected in this country? In this country there is no separate election for prime minister, just like the president in United States. Here the legislature, the Lok Sabha, which is elected by people, will directly, it is a party decision. The party which got majority share of votes, they directly elect the leader, in a party based understanding. So the in parliamentary democracy, the executive head is the real executive head is prime minister, and he is elected by the members elected by the citizens. So there is no voting process and all. It is just the leader of the party which is in which has won the election will be directly elected as the prime minister. So if you look at this slide, here you can see the hierarchical order of the union executive, which is a very important functionary in our country. So the president acts as the highest executive of the nation, even though his role is nominal. Then comes the vice president, then comes the prime minister and council of ministers, which are the real executives of the nation. Here the council of ministers are further categorized into cabinet ministers, ministers of state, deputy ministers. So, and along with them there will be some bureaucrats called parliamentary secretaries. So they all together, under the leadership of the prime minister or the headship of prime minister, will function as the real executives of the nation. So they become very key in the administration of the country. Even the Constitution of India, it provides the Council of Ministers and a Prime Minister to aid and advise the President. So in the Constitution, the provision is like this. There will be Council of Ministers, and this Council of Ministers will be headed by a Prime Minister, and this all together, that is the Council of Ministers and the Prime Minister, will together aid and advise the President. They involve in the functioning of the President even. That shows that the President is nominal and the Prime Minister and his ministers are the real in functioning. And the President, who is the head of the executive, who is a nominal head you can call, he always should exercise his functions on the advice given by the prime minister and his council of ministers. he may ask them to reconsider their advice, but he shall not, he cannot go on his own. So the president, in exercising his function, will be dependent on the advice and help of the Council of Ministers and Prime Ministers. So he may ask this Council of Ministers and and the Prime Minister to go through the advice they have given. Suppose Prime Minister and Council of Ministers, they have given some advice and the President doesn't like it, but there is no option for President. He may just ask to reconsider the advice, just to go back to the advice they have given, and now they can come back. But he cannot say no to such things. And finally, the President should act in accordance with the advice that he received from the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. There is no other option for him. And as we have discussed earlier, ours is a parliamentary form of government where people's representatives or the representatives elected by people will have the supreme powers. Therefore, the Prime Minister and Council of Ministers are elected by the people. May not be directly, but their representatives will elect the Prime Minister. Hence, I am saying here it may not be directly. So, as the power is directly transferred from people here, we can say that the institution of Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister is most powerful institution. They have received the power directly from the people, whereas the President was indirectly elected, not directly elected. Hence, this Prime Minister and Council of Ministers is a powerful institution in Indian political. So now let us understand the appointment of Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister of India is appointed by the President. So here, while appointing the Prime Minister, the President cannot act arbitrarily. So what do you mean by arbitrary appointment? That means the President cannot use his own choice to select the Prime Minister. So here, what can the President do? So there is a convention for that. That means there is actually a procedure for the President to appoint a Prime Minister. So what he does? See, the President invites the leader of the majority party or group in Lok Sabha to form the government. So once elections are finished, definitely a political party might emerge victorious. That means a political party or a group of political parties may have majority share of vote to form the government. If a single political party wins the election, there is one kind of situation here. So single party has won. Now what will happen? The President will ask this single party which has won the election to elect their leader of majority or to elect their leader. So once a party wins the election, the the President will ask the party to elect their leader, and the members of the winning party, they will elect their leader and they propose a particular leader as Prime Minister candidate. Once such information is received from the party which has won the election, then President will appoint such leader as the leader of majority party as the Prime Minister. But there is another situation here. If no single party wins election, that means to form the government, no party got majority share. There is some equal share between different parties. And now, what is the circumstance now? At this situation, there is no electing of leader, right? So no single party is there. There are many parties now with equal share of votes. At this situation, even the President cannot use his choice, but using his discretionary powers, what the President can do is he will ask all these small group of parties to elect the leader, or he may select a candidate in such a way that that candidate must have acceptancy in all the small political parties which are ready to form the government. That is, the President has to appoint that person who can prove that he has the support of smaller groups. So this situation arises when no single party wins election. When group of parties are required to form the government, then president using his discretionary powers, what he will do, he will ask all the smaller group of parties, or he will name a candidate and ask him to prove acceptancy among all the smaller group of parties which are ready to form the government. So he may choose the candidate there using his discretionary power, but that candidate has to again prove his acceptancy among all the parties which are going to involve in the formation of government. Otherwise, if single party wins the election, then it is not a big problem, because at this time that single party itself will sit and decide their leader. They will nominate or they will send that name to the president, and president will has no option except to appoint him as the prime minister of the country. So after understanding the appointment of president, then the other important functionaries who helps the prime minister is the council of ministers. So once prime minister is appointed, then the procedure of appointment of council of ministers will start. Article 75 of the constitution will be explaining about this council of ministers and their appointment. So always the prime minister is appointed by president, and even other ministers are also appointed by president. But what happens here is, before appointing the council of ministers, the president must and should take the advice, or he must depend on the advice of the prime minister. Here the president cannot choose the council of ministers directly. He should take the advice of prime minister. So by convention, the president has to accept the choice of prime minister. What do you mean by convention here? As per the constitutional procedure and provisions, president will appoint the council of ministers with the help taken from prime minister. The prime minister will have his freedom to select his team of ministers, and once the prime minister decides with his team of ministers, he will send the list to the president, and the president must and should accept the choice of the president, and he should later make arrangements for the appointment of council of ministers. And even in the dismissal of the council of ministers or the appointment of council of ministers, the choice of prime minister will prevail. There is a very nominal role of president in such affairs. So even in the dismissal and appointment of council of minister, whatever the prime minister wishes, so that the president will do, and it becomes his nominal duty. And normally only the members of parliament are appointed as ministers. That means the members who are taken into the ministry or who are appointed as ministers into the prime minister's council, here they must be members of any house of the parliament. That means the members who are appointed as council of ministers, they must be members of either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. And if somebody is appointed as a minister out of the house, suppose the prime minister selects somebody who does not belong to any house of the parliament, because of his choice he may select anybody. At this situation, if prime minister appoints a particular person as minister who is out of the parliament, that means he is not a member of any house of the parliament, then that person who was selected as minister must and should be elected as a member of any house of the parliament within 6 months from the date of his appointment. Suppose a person, some ex-candidate has been taken as minister by prime minister, then this candidate called X must be elected to any house of the parliament before 6 months or within 6 months after his appointment date. Suppose if he is appointed today, or he is appointed on some in June or something, so within 6 months he should get elected to any house of the parliament. otherwise he has to resign from the post of a minister, as his ministry will become invalid. So the Prime Minister can select anybody, but that anybody must and should get elected as a member of any house of the Parliament within a period of 6 months. So the Council of Ministers was a concept or was a provision in Constitution. There is such provision called Council of Ministers in the Constitution itself, but this was up to 1979. So before 1979, there is a provision in the Constitution called Council of Ministers who will be helping the Prime Minister. But in the year 1979, this word Council of Ministers was further elaborated, and because of the 44th amendment brought to Constitution in the year 1979, it clearly mentions a set of category within Council of Ministers called Cabinet. So within the Council of Ministers, the 44th Amendment Act is clearly saying that there is another group of ministers called Cabinet. Here, in this act, what was mentioned was the President shall not issue a proclamation of national emergency unless the decision of Union Cabinet, that is Prime Ministers and Ministers of Cabinet rank, has been communicated to him in writing. So the 44th Amendment Act has brought this provision to Constitution. What is that provision? The President, in exercising his emergency powers, for example, if it is a national emergency, he cannot proclaim emergency on his own. He should get that proclamation in written form from the Union Cabinet. So what do you mean by Union Cabinet here? Union Cabinet includes Prime Minister and his team of core important ministers. Not four, it is core, C-O-R-E, core. So very important ministers to the Prime Minister, it was referred as Cabinet. So for the first time in describing the exercise of President's emergency powers, this Cabinet has been elaborated in our Constitution, and that is during the emergency. After this, the distinction between Cabinet and Council of Ministers has become evident. So till this description of Union Cabinet in the emergency functioning of the President, there was no reference. It was just only Council of Ministers. But only in this situation called during the President exercising his powers, emergency power called national emergency, he can proclaim emergency if he receives such information from Union Cabinet. So what does this Union Cabinet includes? The Prime Minister and his important group of ministers. And for your understanding, what is the difference between Cabinet and Council of Ministers? As you know that the Prime Minister is chief advisor of the President. He is the head of the ministers. And these cabinet ministers are the important senior most ministers who are helping the Prime Minister. So here the cabinet ministers will be generally senior most party leaders who are taken as a important group of ministers by Prime Minister. So this is to the introduction of the cabinet ministers and the Council of Ministers. So now let us try to understand the different categories of ministers who will be working for the Prime Minister in his governance. So as we have said that there are three categories of ministers. So who are those three? One is the cabinet minister, and the second group of ministers are ministers of state, and the third group of ministers are deputy ministers. So these three group of ministers along with Prime Minister will be called as Council of Ministers, and the head of the Council of Ministers is Prime Minister. So let us now discuss one by one. What do you mean by cabinet ministers? See, the word cabinet has come from the kitchen cabinet, which has seen its origin in the England. So in England, in the beginning days of their parliamentary administration, they call the ministers of the head as kitchen cabinet. Hence, slowly it was adapted into our constitution also. So let us not go into that very much, but so let us go. What is cabinet ministers? They are the most important ministers or members of Council of Ministers. Among the Council of Ministers, there are different categories. One is cabinet, one is minister of state, and one is deputy minister. And the cabinet ministers are very important ministers among the Council of Ministers, and they hold important portfolios. Portfolios means here positions. So why they are referred as cabinet ministers? Because they hold very important positions or ministries in the prime minister's governance, like home minister, defense minister, finance minister, external affairs minister, railway minister, etc. So there are very important ministries which are like foundations to the country's governance. Like you take home minister, defense. So they're all very important. Such key important ministries or portfolios or positions will be given to the cabinet ministers. As we have discussed that these cabinet ministers are senior most party leaders. They are politically very senior and they are capable of handling such important ministries. Hence always prime minister in appointing ministers to such important sectors like home, defense and finance, he will choose cabinet ministers as the senior most leaders. And a cabinet minister is in charge of a ministry and sometimes more than one ministry. That means the prime minister may give one ministry or more than one ministry to a single cabinet minister, and only cabinet ministers will have the right to attend the meetings of the cabinet. They together determine the policy and program of the government. Prime Minister will conduct meetings always with the cabinet, not with the entire council of ministers. If necessary, he may go for all the council of ministers, but usual practice is he will conduct meeting with the cabinet ministers who are very few in number, but they are senior most and they hold very key positions. And only cabinet ministers have right to attend the meetings, to such meetings held by prime minister. In such meetings, prime minister and this cabinet will decide the policies of the government. So we'll discuss later what is this policy and other issues. So in just implementing what is good for the governance, they take several decisions. In taking such decisions, prime minister will take into account the opinions of this cabinet. And coming to the next kind of ministers called ministers of state. They are the second category of ministers and they may or may not hold an independent charge. That means they may not be given a complete ministry into their hands. They may be given as an assistant to a cabinet minister. So they may ask, the prime minister may ask a minister to assist the cabinet minister because he cannot alone do everything. If defense you take, it's a very big department. To hold that department, single minister can't afford. So he may ask a ministry of state to help him. And these the prime minister may or may not consult them in all the issues because he always keeps in touch with the cabinet ministers, and they do not even participate. That means the ministers of state do not even participate in the cabinet meetings, but they may be invited when matters are concerning to their departments are being considered. So if necessary, they'll be asked to come and they'll be taking their opinions. Otherwise, mostly the prime minister will be held, keeping meetings with the cabinet ministers. Ministers of state, they may or may not hold a ministry, but they will be helping the cabinet ministers and they do not even attend cabinet meetings until they are invited. So the third category of ministers are referred as deputy ministers. So they are the third category of ministers who assist both the cabinet ministers and the ministers of state, or you can call them as together they can help the council of ministers. They are the junior most ministers and are placed under senior ministers just to help them or assist them, and they take no part in cabinet deliberations. so they'll not be informed about cabinet meetings and all, but the cabinet ministers and the ministers of state may use their services in exercising their duties more efficiently. I know they are the junior most ministers. So, and this is about the different categories of ministers. And now let us go through a little bit of this council of ministers only. This council of ministers, which includes the three categories which we have discussed now, it includes prime minister and other ministers in total, and these people are appointed by president on the advice of prime minister. This is just now I am rewinding again. So the council of ministers include the president and other group of ministers like cabinet, ministers of state and deputy ministers. So all this together, they will be working to aid and advise the president, and in exercise, and these people are appointed by prime minister, now appointed by president with the advice taken from prime minister. And the constitution of India does not specify either the number of members of council of ministers or classify the members of ministers into different ranks. So there is no such reference in our constitution about that how many members should be present as council of ministers and how many categories of ministers should be present. Right now we have three categories, but it is the will and wish of the prime minister and the parliament. They can categorize into different ministers. There is no such description in the constitution. But the 91st Amendment Act in 2003 has brought a change in the the previous existing provision in constitution. Now this 91st Amendment Act 2003 has put a ceiling on the size of council of ministers. That means the president and the government cannot go for how many number of ministers they want. There is definitely a ceiling. That means there is a limit on the size of the ministers. So it must be 50% of the strength of Lok Sabha if it is central government or state legislative government. It may be a central government or maybe a state government. The cabinet size or the council of ministers size must be 15% of the strength of Lok Sabha. So to the total strength of Lok Sabha, 15% can be taken as the ministers or the council of ministers for the administration. And even in the state governments, same thing should be followed. They should have 15% of their strength of their assembly as ministers. And in case of very small states, it can be the limit can be it can goes up to 12 members as ministers, maximum number of ministers. And why do you think this amendment act has been brought, and why do you think there should be a limitation on the council of ministers, the size of the council of ministers? Because if there is no limit on the size of ministers, there is a chance that the other party leaders who are not in government may always wish for the status of a minister and try to shift their loyalty to the ruling party. And whenever the ruling party wanted to disturb the opposition, and they may choose this size as an option, and they may incorporate any number of ministers for their political purposes. To avoid such defections from one party to another party, just there is no limit, because if there is no limit to the number of ministers to be taken, what the ruling party may do, it may take any number of people from other parties and try to incorporate them in their ministries, and this will become a golden chance for others to shift their loyalties. So to stop such defections from other parties, the size and limit has been brought to there is a size of limit has been brought to the council of ministers. And also having jumbo cabinets, or that means very big ministries just for political reasons, just to politically satisfy many people, the prime minister may accommodate many people into his ministry, and he may turn it into a very big size, which is a huge burden on the country's expenditure. To avoid such huge expenditure, as well as to avoid such defections, there is a limitation brought on the size of council of ministers. As of now, I think there are in Modi's cabinet as on May 2019, no, they have 57, 24 cabinet, 9 Ministry of State and 24 deputy ministers, like that they have categorized, and 57 total in Council of Ministers. So which is nothing but the 15% of the strength of Lok Sabha. So now let us have a in-depth look on the cabinet ministers. So how these ministers are appointed and what is their role and other things. So among the Council of Ministers, the cabinet ministers are very important. See how they are formed. The cabinet is composed of a small but important body of senior leaders of the party. Here, the cabinet size of the cabinet, see, I am not talking about the entire Council of Ministers. I am talking about the important group of Council of Ministers. The important group of Council of Ministers is cabinet. This group is very close to the Prime Minister and it composes of the senior leaders of the party. So the Prime Minister will take trusty men. That means he will have certain people who very close within the party, and they will be very senior in the political things, and such people he will select and he will give them important portfolios and he will trust them more and he will make them as part of important part of administration. In fact, the cabinet which has been taken by Prime Minister is very important. It is pivot round which the whole administration revolves. Here, what do you mean by pivot? Means very important. So the cabinet selected by the Prime Minister is very important in the administration, because all major departments, all major ministries, they will be the heads, and the Prime Minister will completely be dependent on these cabinet ministers for taking any decisions of the government. Any key, very important decisions of the government are taken by consultation with this cabinet. And once this cabinet, suppose the government wants to make any decision, the Prime Minister calls for a cabinet meeting, and after calling the cabinet meeting, he will put forward the issue in front of all the cabinet ministers and they will discuss and then finally come up with a decision. And all such decisions are communicated to the other ministers in the Council of Ministers. Even though the other ministers are not part of taking such important decisions, they must and should follow the decisions taken by Prime Minister and the cabinet. So even though the other Council of Ministers are not part of the decision making of the government policies, they should follow that instructions from cabinet ministers. So how this cabinet is appointed? As I said, the Prime Minister will always select his trustworthy persons, senior most leaders of his party whom he trusts will be taken as cabinet ministers. And even though it is small, it is a very powerful institution. And along with Prime Minister, the cabinet will function in the advice of giving advice to the President, in many such programs. And once the Prime Minister selects his trustworthy and senior leaders, he will send that list to the President, and President will appoint them as cabinet ministers, and the President will later depend on Prime Ministers and decisions from such cabinet. Okay, so this is a little bit elaboration about the cabinet ministers, and you can see the Prime Minister Narendra Modi with his team of cabinet ministers. Those are few there, but there will be some more important ministers there. So they hold very important positions. They may have number of ministries under their control, and they have the power to go to attend the meetings of the Prime Minister. They decide the programs and policies of the government. Even though they are small, they are very powerful in functioning, as the entire administration revolves around them. So now let us discuss the term of office for this Council of Ministers. The ministers hold office or their position during the pleasure of the President. So what do you mean by pleasure of the President? That means till the ministers function according to the provisions of constitution or according to the limitations of the constitution, which indirectly becomes the pleasure of the president. So until and unless until, or you can call like, or you can put this way, until the council of ministers functions according to constitution, they become the they become the pleasure of the president. So the ministers can hold the office during the pleasure of the president, but the president has little power even in regard, because see, we can call it as like till the pleasure of president these ministers can function, but that doesn't mean that the president can directly take control of these ministers and do, he can dictate terms to this council, but not like that. The council of ministers along with prime minister are directly responsible to Lok Sabha and can remain in office till they have the majority support in the House of People or Lok Sabha. And so they will be in office during the pleasure of president. That means if they have constitutionally, if they're elected or if they are functioning as per constitution, it becomes pleasure of the president and they can function. But the council of ministers and prime minister are not responsible to president. They can function to the pleasure of president, but they are directly responsible to the Lok Sabha, where the majority, if the government is having majority, then they can function in their office. If Lok Sabha passes no confidence against this council of ministers, then all the ministers have to resign and the government will collapse during such situations. And we have discussed in the powers of president, and in the union legislature we have discussed what is vote of no confidence, who will pass that and what happens to that, and all we have finished. So then comes the council of ministers are collectively responsible to Lok Sabha. That means if they have the majority in the Lok Sabha, they can function. If they don't have, they have to vacate. If the prime minister resigns, all the ministers are tend to be resigned and their government will dissolve. So they are more responsible to Lok Sabha. And before a minister enters upon his office, what did I say? That as per the choice of prime minister, these ministers will be appointed by president, and before that minister enters into his office, the president administers him oath of office and secrecy. So they'll take oath, before entering into the office. In that oath, what they will swear? To the true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of India. That means they are having completely faith on the Constitution, and they will function according to the rules framed by Constitution. And they also work in such a way that they uphold the sovereignty and integrity of the country. So in discharging the duties, the Council of Ministers have to show faith towards Constitution, as well as they should work in such a way that the sovereignty, and what do you mean by sovereignty? The self-rule and integrity of the country, they'll be protecting. They should not cause any harm to the integrity and sovereignty of the country. And they should also faithfully and conscientiously discharge duties without fear or favor, action or ill will. That means in discharging the duties, the Council of Ministers should be conscious of what they are doing, and they should be faithful to the Constitution, and they should not get influenced with any favoritism or out of fear or something else. They should work without fear, without expecting any favors from anybody, or they should not have any personal choices in discharging their duties. So this all will be included in the oath of the ministers. And also these ministers in the oath of secrecy, what do you mean by oath of secrecy? They should not directly or indirectly communicate the information related to the government to any outsiders. Unless it is part of their duty, they should not communicate the decisions of the government or the policies of the government to outsiders which may benefit them. So such things should not be done by the Council of Ministers. Hence we include them in oath of secrecy. during their oath itself. Every minister must be a member of any house of the parliament. If not, they should get elected within 6 months. Failing which, that means if they don't get elected to any of the house or Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, they have to resign from their office. And the salaries and allowances of these ministers will be decided by parliament from time to time as per the law.